U.S. Soccer reaches agreement to pay its women's national team and men's national team equally. Let me give you the facts. My name is Nathan Laurie. If you are new here, we talk about the law and the facts. If you're about that life, don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. U.S. Soccer has announced that it's reached an agreement to pay its women's national team and men's national team equally. They released this fact sheet to help explain the deal and what it means. Now, let me give you a quick recap of how we got here. First, we're going to talk about the money generated in soccer. So here's a chart that shows the difference between the Men's World Cup and Women's World Cup. We look at total prize money, winners prize money, FIFA revenue, ticket sales, and global audience. Now, the most important thing about this chart is obviously the revenue. The Men's World Cup generates $5.36 billion, while the Women's World Cup generates an expected $131 million. That's about 2.5% of what the Men's World Cup generates. Now, that's obviously the reason why the winner's prize money in the Men's World Cup is $38 million, while the winner's prize money in the Women's World Cup is only $4 million in comparison. Matter of fact, the winner's prize money in the Men's World Cup is more than the total prize money in the Women's World Cup. And when the women's national team sued U.S. Soccer, the court made note that, for example, under the men's national team CBA, if the men's team qualified for the 2018 World Cup, which they did not, they would have been paid $2.5 million for just qualifying for the World Cup. But for the women's national team, they were paid $2 million to win the entire Women's World Cup. So think about that. The men, for just qualifying for the Men's World Cup, get more money than the women do for winning the Women's World Cup. Now, with that said, the men can possibly win $38 million, while the women, the most they can win going to their tournament is $4 million. But the women sued because they said they wanted equal pay, even though they couldn't generate the same revenue. So on March 8th, 2019, all 28 members of the United States women's national team filed a gender discrimination lawsuit against the United States Soccer Federation. Now, the women's national team claimed that they were being discriminated against solely because they were women. And as a factual matter, they claimed that they were being paid less than the men overall and on a per game basis. Now, after the team filed its federal lawsuit, U.S. Soccer then filed a motion for summary judgment. And in a shocker, the federal judge overseeing the case ruled in favor of U.S. Soccer. Then after reviewing all the evidence, the judge dismissed the lawsuit. And this is why. First, the court looked at the contract. The men's team, the court found, was on a pay-to-play schedule. They were hired guns. They only got cash. They had no guaranteed money and no benefits. While the women's national team, they got less money, but that money was guaranteed. And they got these benefits. So after determining how each side got paid, the court then did the math to see how much each side was getting paid when you take everything into account. Well, shockingly, the court found that in the time frame covering the lawsuit, 2015 to 2019, that the women's national team actually made more money per game and overall. So they had out-earned the men, but claimed that they were getting paid less. And here it is in the court documents. Then lastly, the court looked at the benefits and drawbacks of each deal. So when you looked at the upside of the contract, the maximum amount that the women's national team could make under the agreement was about $6 million before benefits. And the maximum amount that the men's national team could have made was about $15 million. Remember, they don't get any benefits. Now, this seems unfair. The men can make substantially more than the women. But on the opposite side, when you're talking about the minimum each contract could make, because of the guarantees, the women's contract was capped at $3 million, while the men's contract was $0. The lowest they could get was $0 because they had no guaranteed money. So on the upside, the men were doing better, but on the downside, the men were doing worse. Now that we see the upside and downside of both contracts, we actually were able to see the downside of both contracts play out. Now, U.S. Soccer had to call off all games because of COVID-19. Now, in this scenario, the men's team, who, remember, had no guaranteed money and only got paid if they played, well, couldn't play any games, so they got absolutely no money. But the women had a guaranteed deal. So it didn't matter. It didn't matter that there were no games. They still got their $20,000, $100,000 salaries, their $22,000, $62,000 salaries, and full benefits, which came out to about $3 million and full benefits, guaranteed.
And we saw this play out most starkly during COVID when nobody was playing any games and the women got paid. They got paid the entire year when all of the games were shut down and the men didn't get paid at all. And it's precisely for these guaranteed salary and benefits that the women did bargain for this structure, and it's why they rejected the men's structure in their collective bargaining negotiations.
So after looking at all of that, the court concluded this. This approach, merely comparing what each team would have made under the other team's CBA, is untenable. In this case, because it ignores the reality that the men's national team and women's national team bargained for different agreements which reflect different preferences, and that the women's national team explicitly rejected the terms they now seek to retroactively impose on themselves. For the first time, the women's national team requested bonuses equivalent to those received by the men's national team was in January 2016. The United States Soccer Federation rejected that proposal. However, and this is important, because the women's national team was not asking for a pay-to-play arrangement similar to the men's national team. Instead, it was asking for all the upsides of the men's national team. Remember, the higher bonuses without any of the drawbacks, no base salary, no guaranteed money. In May 2016, the United States Soccer Federation offered the women's national team a pay-to-play proposal similar to the men's, right? So they offered them a deal similar to the men's deal. But the women's national team rejected it, preferring an agreement that involved some elements of guaranteed compensation. So the court called them out and said, you're not looking for equal pay, you're looking for unequal pay. You want all the money, all the benefits, all the guarantees, and none of the drawbacks. So their case was dismissed. Then the women's national team appealed, saying that the judge got it wrong. And then in another twist, U.S. Soccer, after winning the case, settled for $24 million. Now this brings us to the day, because that settlement agreement was contingent on a new deal being signed by both the men's national team and the women's national team. Now, there were two major issues that had to be overcome. First, guaranteed money that the women were getting versus the non-guaranteed money that the men were getting. How was U.S. Soccer going to resolve that? And the second issue was the World Cup prize money. The women were earning 1/10 of what the men were earning at the World Cup. So how would those be equalized? Well, U.S. Soccer tells us in this fact sheet exactly how they are going to equalize the World Cup money. So here, their key aspects of the new CBA sign says equalization of FIFA World Cup prize money. And a first of its kind agreement for any federation in the world. The women's and men's national teams will pool and share FIFA World Cup prize money. So let's see how this would have worked in the 2014 and 2015 World Cup cycles, where both the men's team and women's team made the World Cup. The women's team won the Women's World Cup, while the men's team lost the Men's World Cup, and they were kicked in the round of 16.
Highlights pay discrepancy at the World Cup, alleging that the pay was so skewed that when the men's team lost in round 16 of the World Cup in 2014, they received bonuses totaling more than $5 million. The following year, when the women won it all, they received less than $2 million.
So based on what we've seen, the men in 2014 lost in the round of 16 and earned $5,375,000. And the Women's World Cup, they won the tournament and earned $1.725 million for winning that tournament. So if we combine those two figures, that comes out to $7,100,000, right? A little over $7 million. So based on the new collective bargaining agreement, U.S. Soccer is going to take that money, pool it together, and divide it equally. That comes out to $3,550,000. That money is going to be split evenly between the men's team and the women's team. So the men who lost in the round of 16 would actually be giving to the women's team $1.8 million. And that $1.8 million is more than the women would have received for winning the entire tournament. Understand that the men losing in the round of 16 made more than the women winning the entire tournament. So as you can see, the men's team would essentially be transferring $1.8 million to the women's team. And think about how twisted this is. The women's team are making more from the men's team than they are from winning their own tournament. Right? For winning their own tournament, they're making $1.725 mil. But on top of that, they're making $1.825 mil because the men made it to the round of 16 in the men's tournament. So yes, the men have agreed to give up millions of dollars in prize money to the women's national team. And they've agreed to do this for the next 2 World Cup cycles. So now that we understand how they're putting the money together and dividing it, now let's talk about appearances and game bonuses. Well, it says here the U.S. women's national team and men's national team have identical performance-based bonuses for all games and competitions. Fine. The U.S. women's national team will no longer have guaranteed salaries and will instead have the same pay-to-play structure as the U.S. men's national team, right? So this chart now changes. There's no more guaranteed money, right? They're both getting equal money, no more guarantees. But we still haven't discussed the benefits. Well, U.S. Soccer tells us that there are additional benefits for both the men's national team and women's national team. They both get retirement benefits and they both get child care benefits. But then U.S. Soccer also says women get special benefits. They get parental leave, insurance benefits, and long-term disability just for the women's national team. The men's team don't get any of this. And think about what insurance benefits mean. Life insurance, is that your health insurance, right? That's all those insurances that you talk about. Vision insurance, dental insurance. Instead of listing it out, it's all under insurance benefits. And instead of listing it out, short-term disability. Again, these are not offered to the men. So let's adjust our chart. Here it is. So the men and women both get on pay-to-play schedules and no guaranteed money. They both get a retirement and childcare, but all those benefits that the women enjoyed, they also get, right? They essentially didn't lose any of their benefits. They kept them all. So at the end of the day, the women's national team essentially just gave up guaranteed money and went to a pay-to-play schedule. While the men's national team, they gained retirement benefits and childcare. That's all that happened. So let me know in the comment section, do you believe that this was a good deal for both the men's team and the women's team? Do you think this is fair? There is absolutely no scenario in which the women's team will be sending money to the men's team. In every formulation of this, the men's team will always be the ones transferring millions of dollars to the women's national team. Let me know in the comment section, is this equal pay or not?